Yeah. The reason is because you can't track it.
Well, I think I don't like this idea at all.
When we saw the Silk Road shut down, a lot of people said, Bitcoin's nothing but illegal drugs on the internet. That's what it is. And they would point at the Silk Road and say, look here at all the stuff that's happening here. And I think when you saw the Silk Road shut down and Bitcoin transaction volume take a tiny little dip and then keep going up, I think that was a great event to point at and say, it really wasn't about that. It really isn't about that. It's a tiny little part of the economy.
I guess in the last week I've really started hearing about Bitcoin. Recently I heard a scenario after the FBI had seized a bunch of Bitcoins due to illegal transactions. Now they're going to be auctioning them off like they would a private yacht for, from some drug dealer. So that in a way legitimizes the use of it as a currency.
Looks like it's the first live Bitcoin exchange on Wall Street. Looks that way.
So 1 for 9. Buying or selling? Right now we are looking at the open interest at the floor of the Bitcoin exchange. There's different exchanges that are online that will present the bid and ask, but there's no true open outcry exchange. Buyers and sellers coming together in an open, clear, transparent, honest way.
What do we call it? 900?
Yes.
Here's my transaction, probably the first 2 transactions of the day. It's really not about the money, it's about being involved. And I think there's a lot more people going to follow me.
Engaging in money laundering, Shrem enabled people to transfer money from Bitcoin to cash via his company called BitInstant. Now, the other point that the DEA is making is that Shrem bought drugs online at Silk Road and that he knew Silk Road was a trafficking website.
And we know the Winklevoss twins, who obviously were featured in the movie about Facebook, they're actually investors in Shrem's company.
Yeah, a lot of people are very excited by this idea. They like the idea that you can have a currency that is not tied to any kind of central bank. But at the same time, think about it. If you're in the federal government, you don't like the idea that people could effectively use another form of cash to buy things that they shouldn't be buying online.
With me, it wasn't all my customers. It was one customer. Out of about 100,000 customers, this was one customer. One thing, I made that case to my sentencing. I said, Your Honor, this was one customer. It happened that literally I was coming home from Amsterdam. It was in my sweatshirt. I was still stoned. I didn't know what was going on.
Charlie did not know when to shut up, and that ended up getting him in trouble and probably led to the end of his company.
But they got me into the Patriot Act, and it's money laundering because I knew that the money I was taking was eventually possibly going to be used for drug trafficking. Now, drug trafficking is not buying drugs, it's selling drugs. I didn't have the drug seller, I helped the guy buy drugs. But I never went to trial because, and I pled guilty because who wins at trial? Like this guy Silk Road, he's gonna go to life. In trial, all I need to get was a lady whose son died from a cocaine overdose, and the jury would have convicted me right there.
So essentially, Charlie was selling Bitcoins to a guy who was selling Bitcoins to people who were putting drugs into their own bodies. And for this, Charlie was charged with crimes that could have put him in jail for 20 years. That's what the prosecutors were shooting for. We have banks that have ATMs on every street corner in America, and those banks know very well that cash is getting used for drugs. And yet, that's fine. They're allowed to do that. No one gets in trouble. But Charlie sells Bitcoin to a guy who sells Bitcoin to someone who uses drugs, and he goes to jail. He was an entrepreneur that started building this industry, built services that people found useful, when bankers almost destroyed the world economy, and none of them got in trouble whatsoever. And here we have this 23-year-old kid, he goes to jail because he started building an alternative.
Over the last
last 6 months, our agency has been conducting an extensive inquiry into virtual currency. The information we're going to gather in this fact-finding effort will allow us to put forward, during the course of 2014, a proposed regulatory framework for virtual currency firms operating in New York. Yesterday, we had serious criminal conduct come to light involving virtual currency as a vehicle for money laundering, drug trafficking, and other major felonies. Right now, the regulation of virtual currency industry is still akin to a virtual Wild West. That's why we're evaluating whether our agency should issue a so-called bit license, specifically tailored to virtual currencies.
I think people who imagine a very powerful utility like Bitcoin that would somehow escape regulation entirely are either naive or extreme optimists.
Bitcoin is a battle of ideas, and it forces the issue of whether people should be as free in their handling of money as they are in their handling of speech or religion or relationships with each other.
If you want to have this thing go mainstream, you're going to have the regulators, the lawmakers weigh in on it. One of the first ones who really took an interest was Benjamin Lawsky, very important regulator in the financial world, and in January 2014 holds these public hearings because he wants to come up with a license for Bitcoin companies.
We believe that putting in place appropriate regulatory safeguards for virtual currencies will ultimately be beneficial to the long-term strength of the industry itself.
Lawsky was essentially given the opportunity to write the rules for this whole new industry from scratch.
The first question is the obvious one that's on everyone's mind. It was sort of unexpected yesterday, but with the arrests we saw, obviously that's put a bit of a cloud hanging over the industry right now. And so how do each of you react to what we saw yesterday, what it means for Bitcoin or virtual currency and its future?
I think it further supports that bad guys are going to do bad things and they're going to use whatever technology is available to them. But I view it as, if the allegations are true and they're convicted, the system works.
Are people still doing bad things with Bitcoin? Sure. Is the majority of the Bitcoin activity vice? Not a chance. So I think the issue you raise is one that people like to write about, the media likes to write about, makes great headlines, you get a lot of clicks, you can sell a lot of ads, but I think it's in the rearview mirror.
There are some people in the Bitcoin community from the libertarian side of things that want government to just leave it alone. Would you say regulation is both inevitable, but more importantly, actually ultimately going to be crucial for the survival of virtual currency?
Sounds like a terrible idea to me. Just understand what we're trying to do with Bitcoin. We're trying to create a world where transactions can move globally for free, okay? And in making these companies hire, some outsourced compliance firm is a bad idea.
It'd be great in any industry if you could just open the door and let folks run out and give a shot.
We may choose not to invest in a company if they can't get licensed by you.
If the choice ultimately is between preventing money laundering on the one hand, and I probably even shouldn't use the word money laundering because it's too nice a word, frankly. Money laundering is the facilitation of all kinds of horrific crimes that I think everyone in this room never wants to see happen. Acts of terrorism, funding rogue nations, etc., all take place through massive money laundering. Now, if the choice for the regulator is permit money laundering on the one hand or permit innovation on the other, we're always going to choose squelching the money laundering first.
I agree that I don't think anybody wants money laundering. When we first saw Bitcoin, about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, I don't think anybody would deny that it was a bit of a wild west because there was no regulation, there was no framework to evaluate the asset, evaluate companies, determine who was compliant, who was not. And a Wild West, attracts cowboys. And I don't think anybody here would disagree with the fact that a sheriff would be a good thing.
A lot of, I think, the entrepreneurs feel like they have to self-censor. They don't want to come out vocally critical of the regulations. Part of that is maybe because some of them just like regulations, but I think another part of it, some of them just feel like they will get attention of the regulators if they come out against them.
Yes, we want them to innovate, but at the same time, we just can't live in a world where we're going to permit money laundering to go on.
I think regulators should give Bitcoin some time to grow up. Too much regulation now will just stifle innovation. And I think before regulators kind of come in and say, we're going to solve all your problems, and then fail to solve all our problems, I think they should give the innovators time to solve those problems.
One function of regulation is to make things clearer. So right now, Bitcoin, because it's so new, is in a state of flux everywhere.
The lesson from the internet is anything that China bans, invest in. That's a joke, but the US allows Google to operate here, allows Twitter to operate here, allows Bitcoin to operate here, allows Facebook to operate here. Chinese government doesn't allow any of those companies to operate the way they operate in this country, or at all. It's about freedom, ultimately.
You know, we're 50 yards from the old World Trade Center here, and I think all of us never want to see anything like that happen again. And it would have been a lot harder for 9/11 to ever have occurred had we had the protections in place that would prevent the movement of massive amounts of money around the globe by people who would want to kill everybody in this room. So I think the key is to not create useless regulation, but I think the motives behind a lot of those rules are to ensure we don't miss something again.
Since 2001, there's this absurd obsession with terrorism. So anytime a regulator gets up and says,